Thank you. Crikey. I went to Crown Hill Secondary Modern and after failing the 11 plus and left school at 15 to be a soccer player. So, speaking in the Oxford Union, me mum would be so sodding proud if she knew it existed. The theme that I'm going to talk about today is simply putting information before you that you wouldn't normally get through mainstream channels. It's not something that I'm trying to sell to you. It's not something I'm trying to get you to believe, because the world is drowning in fricking people standing up and telling others what they should think. Whether it's religion, whether it's politics, whether it's science, whatever it is, medicine, we're constantly being told, this is how it is, you must believe it, and if you don't believe it, you're wrong. So all I'm doing tonight is putting information before you, and what you make of it not only doesn't matter to me, it's none of my sodding business what you make of what I say. It's your business. And so I just want to emphasize from the start that I'm not here to get you to believe anything. Just to say there is another way of looking at this thing called life and world events as we hurtle by the day much more than ever appears in the mainstream media towards Orwell's society. Gandhi said, an error does not become truth by reason of multiplied propagation, nor does truth become error because no one will see it. He also said, even if you are in a minority of one, the truth is still the truth. The truth is not something you believe, the truth is something that is. And it's your relationship to it that is the decision we make. Obviously, there are different versions of truth, and there's different ways of looking at life. But truth itself is not something we believe, it is something that we align with or don't align with. So, in short, if one person is standing up and saying something, it doesn't mean it's not true. Just because everybody seems to be saying the same thing doesn't mean it is true. There was a time when, if I'd have stood here centuries ago and said the earth was round, guy's a nutter. What are you talking about? And it's interesting that if you want to suppress someone's sense of what's possible, all you need to do overwhelmingly is to suppress the information they receive about what is possible. And then, boom, box. So, the Earth's not flat, it's a sphere. level of information. You're mad. What about the people at the bottom? They fall off. Introduce more information. Law of gravity. Ah! The apparently ridiculous now becomes possible. The difference between the two, the level of information. So he who controls information controls our sense of possibility. Hence what he was talking about. The world seems so utterly confusing. It seems so complex, so bewildering. What's this? What's that? How's that? What's going on? And the reason it seems so bewildering and so complex is because we lack the level of information in the mainstream, where most people get their information from, to understand what's going on and how the parts fit together. Because that's what I'm going to do tonight, and it's what I do in a massive way in this book, which is quite heavy, because things can look in isolation interesting. Oh yeah, what's going on here? Wonder what that's about. And why is he doing that? And what's this event here? Why has this happened? But when you go boom, 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 and connect the dots, suddenly, oh, so that's what's going on. Connecting the dots is absolutely crucial. And I started 20 years ago on a quest to understand two things. The nature of life. Who are we? What are we doing here? And who really controls world events and what we call society, and to what end? And of course we all start out with this complexity and this bewilderment, but when you start connecting the dots, what's going on becomes the proverbial elephant in the sodding living room. World events, overwhelmingly, the major ones that change society and move us in a certain direction, are not by accident but by design. I often hear people say, do you believe in the conspiracy theory of history or the cock-up theory? As if, like, you've got to choose. Some things that happen in the world are cock-ups, mistakes that people have made. Oh, didn't mean that. But within that are coldly calculated changes in society, which are now becoming daily so obvious, to take the power over the global state, because that's what they want, and that's what they're flying towards by the day, in the hands of a ludicrously few people. This is a famous saying, of course. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. I know that one. I got that one. Early 90s. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. Again and again, you see this process. And what's happening now, because when I started out talking about this nearly 20 years ago, like, I was talking to more chairs than bloody people. And on May the 24th, I'm talking at the Brixton Academy, 2,500 seats, was sold out 3 months in advance. Now, that is the difference, encapsulated really, in the way that more and more people are beginning to say, this is starting to make sense of the world. They're starting to see that the world is not just a little bit not like we thought it was, it is nothing like we thought it was. Now, I have this little thing, thing that I do. If you get too close to something, you can get so caught up in it that you lose perspective. And I just say to people, take a deep breath, take a step back, look at it again. And you can start to see things you couldn't see before. Who do you think is going to win the presidency? Doesn't matter. So we have this thing in America, anyone can become president. Because that's why it's the land of the free. Well, anyone can become president as long as they've got the people that control the media and the money behind them. Anyone else? No chance. And now we've got a choice. It is said, I use the word choice, I stand back in amazement, between, it seems, these three people. All of them connected to the same network that I'm talking about tonight. All different masks on the same face, apparently offering choice. Barack Obama, he's talking about change, change you can believe in. The person behind his campaign is Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski. This is the man who was the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, who a couple of years or so ago came out publicly and admitted that he had led the Carter administration to manipulate and entice the Soviet Union into Afghanistan for the occupation that led to the war, millions of dead people, and came out the other side with the Taliban and all the other stuff. He is the man behind Barack Obama, who's talking about being against war. It's a scam. And people supporting that guy are going to be desperately disappointed if he makes it to the White House and what really he's there to do comes through. Because this is the point. We are watching on the television news and in the media in general, we are watching a movie. A movie to give us the impression that we have freedom, that we have choice, when there's one force behind the apparent different people in the movie. And it's the same, not just within countries, but between countries, where you have the same force manipulating apparently different countries to the same end. It's not some kind of miracle of coincidence that a Labour Prime Minister was hand in glove with a Democrat President Clinton, and then when they change over there, he becomes equally, if not more, connected to a far-right Republican president in George Bush. It's because Bush and Clinton are controlled by the same network. Blair, Brown, all of them are controlled by the same network, and so they work to a common aim. And these people are far more frightened of the network than they are of public opinion, which is why Blair went massively against public opinion and caused himself enormous grief in terms of his popularity, because that was more acceptable to him than going against the network. They say that Blair was a puppet of George Bush. The fact is, they're both puppets of a force that controls both of them. Same in this country. We have this, what we have is this sleight of hand. And it works like this. The greatest form of dictatorship is a dictatorship where the people think they are free, because they will not rebel against not being free when they think they are. You can talk about fascist dictatorships and communist dictatorships, but where you have a dictatorship that the people can see, touch and taste, where they understand the situation they're in, those kind of dictatorships have a finite life. It might take some time, but they have a finite life because the people know the situation and they can see who the controllers are. The greatest form of control is the prison without the bars, because people will sit there forever because they don't think they're in a prison cell. And one of the ways that they scam this is having two parties overwhelmingly in most countries, and they just keep changing them every now and again. And when the party is in government, it introduces the agenda for further and further centralization of power. The opposition party opposes it. Oh, we have choice. Then there's a farce called an election, and the two parties change sides. Now the party that was opposing centralization of power is in government, it's introducing it. The party that was introducing it in power is now opposing it. Oh, we have choice. The other thing they do is, if they want a certain person in power, like they wanted Blair and like they wanted Margaret Thatcher, then all they do is create mayhem in the opposing party, and people say, well, there's no choice, don't like him much, don't like him much, but what's the choice? How many times in the last 10 years do people say, well, I don't want to vote for Blair, but look at the Tories, they're a mess. So, where's the choice? That's how they scam it. And when Cameron comes in, it's Blair Mark II, under another name. And so in America, those people who are understanding it, they have this phrase, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in. And when the government gets in, the agenda for centralization of power gets in. Politics may not be the oldest profession, but the results are the same. For the reason I'm talking about. Now, this is all possible because we have allowed ourselves, as human beings, to become a herd of unthinking sheep. We've been manipulated to be so, and only by acquiescing to it is it possible for the few to control the many. We're fed the movie constantly. I worked in journalism for years. You know what investigative journalism is today? It's watching the newsroom telly and reading the morning papers. This is what so many humans have allowed themselves to become. And when we do, when we acquiesce to the herd mentality, then the few can control the many, and it's happening on a bigger and bigger scale. I hear people, you know, they get caught in this movie about, oh well, what, are we going to vote for him? And do you think it's going? And what about Clinton? And what about Obama? And what about Brown? Do you think you vote for him? What's his policy on this? And it's like, deep breath, take a step back, look at it again. Oh, it's a piece of shit. Yeah, exactly. That's all it is. That's all it is. And when you start to realize that, the pennies start to drop, and you see that what is apparently, you thought before, random events, are actually coldly, calculatedly connected to lead us down this road to Orwell's state. Oscar Wilde said, most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, their lives are mimicry, their passions are quotation. All the time we are repeating and seeing repeated what other people have said. And you hear things like, everyone knows that, mate. Well, I don't know that, so there's one less than everyone. We've made a start. How did you know that? Oh, well, I heard a so-and-so told me. Repeating, repeating, repeating. Repeaters. And we repeated ourselves into a state of total acquiescence to the movie version of reality in vast numbers of people. We have teacher repeaters who take what they've learned at teacher training college or whatever, they take what they're told to teach in the curriculum, and they teach it, repeating, repeating, repeating. All over society, it's just repeaters. How do you know that? Well, it says that in this book. Well, how does he know that? Doctor repeaters, repeating what the drug reps have told them. Repeating what the medical schools have told them. Oh, and don't you dare go out of this little box, otherwise you get struck off. But it's working, I don't care. Repeater, repeater, repeater. Round and round. Scientists repeaters. We've got scientists repeating the song sheet. Global warming goes by carbon emissions because it says so. And then what they don't tell you is enormous and gathering numbers of cutting-edge scientists in their own disciplines are saying, it doesn't. It's the sun. Isn't that amazing? The sun has a connection with Earth temperature. Ooh. Repeater, repeater, repeater. Then there's journalists. Oh, classic repeaters. You see, what real journalists do is they take the official version of events and they look at it and they see if it stands up, and then they communicate that to the people. What repeater journalists do, 90-odd% these days, unfortunately, is they take the official version of events and they turn around and they pass it on to the people. And so instead of being journalists, they are simply public relations officers for the official version of events and life. And then there's politician repeaters. These politicians who don't say what they believe, don't stand up for what they believe, because that, if they go against their party, will mean that they won't progress and become a minister, and their careers will be affected. So they become voting fodder for the tiny few who are deciding what's going to happen. And while all this goes on, all this comes together, all this obsession and acceptance of the movie version of reality, day by day, the Orwellian state stamps its jackboot closer and closer to global fascism. H.L. Mencken again said, "The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for himself. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable." Why is that? Because governments are not there to serve people. They are there to control people and direct people down a certain agenda road. And once you appreciate that that's what the relationship is between government and people, control, what is happening today begins to make more and more sense when you connect the dots. We have the movie version of events, which hear on the television news and in the newspapers and stuff. And then we have the secret agenda behind the scenes, which is obscured and covered by the movie version of events. And without puppet people, it could not be possible. Follow the white rabbit. Believe what you're told to believe. Think that war is peace, even if you can't spell. That you're a moron if you're against slaughtering the innocent. And as Orwell said, believe that war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. And amazing things are allowed to happen by the vast majority, by the very few. You can pepper bomb cities of civilians and get away with it. This is what they don't want you to see, what's really happening in these wars of freedom. That's what's really happening. What do they want you to see? Hey, here's a game show. Watch this. Shut up. Hey, honey, I think he's going for the car. Liberation. This is what they don't want you to see about what's really happening. Instead, let's have a moral debate about Janet Jackson's breast at the Super Bowl. I'm morally outraged that this should happen. There was a moral outrage across America when this happened at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago or so. Where's the moral outrage? Where's the real immorality? This is what depleted uranium does to Iraqi kids. But never mind, hey, Jerry Springer's on. Hey, we've got some boneheads here being manipulated to have a fight on live television. Hey, honey, he's going to hit him. It's a mind game. People said in very large numbers in the early 1990s that I was crazy, insane, having a midlife crisis. I'm sure many people still think the same. But I tell you what, if I am seen as sane by a world this crazy, I'm disappointed. It seems, like I say, desperately confusing and bewildering, this world, because we don't have the coordinates. I'm just going to go through a few. Coordinate number one, let's get this one out of the way. The biggest terrorists are not in the street, they're in government. At best, terrorists in the street can kill a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 or so sometimes. What they can't do is impose sanctions on Iraq during the 1990s, which according to UN figures alone cost the lives of 500,000 Iraqi children. They can't pepper bomb Baghdad. They can't slaughter and maim what is now estimated to be in excess of 1 million people in Iraq since 2003. Terrorists in the street are not in the same league as terrorists in government. Coordinate, oh no, it's a definition of terrorist. This is an interesting one. Oxford Concise Dictionary, how appropriate. One who favours or uses terror-inspiring methods of governing or coercing government or community, hence terrorism. Precisely. Coordinate number two. The goal is a centrally controlled global fascist dictatorship, which has been worked towards for a very, very long time. The reason it seems to be happening quicker and quicker now is they're getting closer and closer to it. And it's an interesting little truism. The more you centralize power, the more power you then have to centralize even quicker. And that's why the speed of centralization has got faster and faster and faster throughout the last century and into this one. This is the basic structure that they're looking for. A world government that would control all major decisions in the world. Controlling a world central bank that would control global finance. A global currency which would not be cash in the end, it would be purely electronic money, for which there are fundamental implications for freedom. Because if you go into a shop now and you hand over electronic money and they say, no, won't accept your card, this computer won't accept your card, then at least you can still just say, well, I'll pay cash then. Once cash is gone, that's what the cashless society is all about, that computer decides if you eat or not. They want a world army which would impose the will of the world government. This is what they're evolving NATO and other amalgamation of armies into. It's supposed to defend Western Europe. That was just Western Europe, nothing to worry about. Now it's in Afghanistan. As I predicted in my books years ago, they would find more and more excuses to expand NATO's sphere of operation. And somebody said to me, a journalist said to me, why do they want a world army? Because there'd be no one to fight. Well, what about any country that says, no, we're not accepting the will of the world government? There we go. Under this structure, they want the European Union, which of course is now massively advanced, the American Union, the North American Union, Mexico, America, and Canada is well advanced behind the scenes, the Pacific Union, the Asia-Pacific Union, and the African Union, which they already have, and under that will become nation states which they want in the end to break up into regions so that there's no unity of defiance to the edifice of power above them. And the reason for centralization of power is very simple. Any dictatorship that wants to control the many from the few has to centralize decision-making. The more diversity of decision-making there is, the less control any central power is going to have over it. And you look in every area of our lives, centralization of power is going on and on and on. So when we're looking at identity cards, I mentioned on that previous slide, the last point there was the microchip population. When we look at identity cards, that's not the end. That's just the stepping stone. I said years ago, way back in the early 90s, to much hilarity, that the agenda was to create a microchipped population linked to a global computer. Well, people ain't laughing anymore, because microchipping is becoming more and more prevalent. The ID card is only part of the move towards it. The idea is for microchip people. In the end, babies microchipped at birth after they leave the womb as part of the birth process. Barcoded people. These microchips are going to be much smaller than this as they progress. This is a story from UPI, which I'll read to you if you can't see it at the back. The US Department of Health and Human Services said Thursday that it was about to begin testing a new technology designed to help more closely monitor and assist the nation's homeless population. See, that's what they do when they're bringing these things in. Start with the most vulnerable groups and then expand it out to the whole population. Under the pilot program, which grew out of a series of policy academies held in the last 2 years, homeless people in participating cities will be implanted with mandatory radio frequency identification tags that social workers and police can use to track their movements. Data from these tracking stations mounted on telephone poles will be transmitted to police and social service workers who will use custom Windows NT software to track movements of the homeless in real time. In what has become a chronic social problem, people living in shelters and on the streets do not seek adequate medical care and frequently contribute to the rising crime rate in major cities. Supporters of these subdermal chips tracking say the technology will discourage implanted homeless men and women from committing crimes while making it easier for government workers to provide social services such as delivering food and medicine. Oh, that's very kind of them. This is the world that we're so rapidly moving into. Same shit, different asshole. Except this is fascism at the technological cutting edge, which allows more control than ever Hitler could get. Coordinate 3. How do they do this? The power of the pyramid. You can also use the symbolism of the spider's web, but the pyramid will work, because that's how it operates. The system operates in its structure a system of pyramids within pyramids, like Russian dolls, one doll inside a bigger doll inside a bigger doll inside a bigger doll. They have pyramids inside bigger pyramids inside bigger pyramids. If you look at any organization today, this university, for instance, any government, any business, any corporation, they're structured as a pyramid. At the bottom, you've got the vast majority of the people working for that organization. And as you go up the pyramid, you're meeting fewer and fewer people, but they know more and more about the agenda than those below them. It goes the other way and the other way, of course. And then eventually, you get to the capstone of the pyramid, the organization, and there are the tiny few people who are the only people that know how it all fits together and know what the real agenda is. Everyone else is at different levels of ignorance for what the organization's really about. And the idea is to hoard knowledge, some of it very, very advanced knowledge, beyond anything we see in the public arena, in the hands of the few, and to keep the mass of the people in ignorance of that knowledge. And if I know really significant things, like the nature of reality and how we create it, and I keep it from everyone else, I am suddenly in a position of massive power. Because of this pyramid system, the network of interbreeding bloodline families going way back to the ancient world, they occupy the capstone of the pyramid. The people we think are in control, like prime ministers, presidents, heads of the World Bank, etc., they're much lower. They are not the people in power. They are the people who are placed in positions to administer into reality the policy dictated from the shadows, from people that the mass of the population have no awareness even exist, let alone how they're manipulating the system. So people focus on Bush, and they say, oh, it's Bush, he's a vehicle. He's not Big Brother. He's just a guy who's placed in a position of power for a short period of time, 8 years or so, and then he'll be replaced by someone else who will do the same job. What doesn't change is the force behind the people we see who are dictating the policy, which is why the policy doesn't change when governments do. This is the pyramid within pyramid system. The banking system is a pyramid. You go into a bank, the person you hand your check over to won't know what's happening in the bank manager's office behind them. He won't know what's happening at the next level and the next level until you get to the clique at the top of the bank, and they're the only people that know how all the different contributions fit together. Because the vast majority of people, like 90-odd% of people, who are daily making contributions in various ways to building this global prison state, have no idea they are doing it or the end that is behind it. Only the few at the top do. So you've got people in all these different organizations and institutions who are making their contributions every day. They're not trying to build a fascist state. They've got children who are going to have to live in it. But they don't know how their individual contributions, innocent in themselves, how they fit together to create anything but an innocent pattern. Only they do. And so, by controlling the top of these various pyramids of institutions within society, they dictate a common policy. And at the heart of that is the constant and incessant centralization of power, so the few have more and more power with every passing week. This is the top of the pyramid, manipulating those representing the top of the pyramid in the movie to create the manipulation that takes us down the road to tyranny. And if you look at the Masonic structure, or any structure of any secret society, it's just the same. Because alongside this network of interbreeding families, you have the secret society network, which they use to make sure either they or their gophers occupy the positions of power. So here you have the Masonic structure. The vast majority of Freemasons, because people say, it's the Freemasons. No, it's not. The vast majority of Freemasons haven't got a clue what their organization's part of. Only the few do. These different secret societies, like the Freemasons, the Knights of Malta, the Knights Templar, all these different ones, they feed the chosen few up into this other pyramid that I'll call the Illuminati pyramid, but these organizations don't like to give themselves names, because you try researching an organization that doesn't have a name. Not easy, so you have to give it one. But Illuminati is one they do use. And it's at this level of the game where the real knowledge is and the real manipulation comes from. So even the vast majority of people in secret societies have no clue what it's all about. This is Albert Pike, infamous and famous Freemason in America, absolutely almost worshipped by the Freemasonic community in America. And he said this: "Fictions are necessary to the people, and the truth becomes deadly to those who are not strong enough to contemplate it in all its brilliance. In fact, what can there be in common between the vile multitude and sublime wisdom? The truth must be kept secret, and the masses need a teaching proportioned to their imperfect reason." That is exactly the game, to keep that knowledge in the hands of the few and the mass of the people in ignorance of that knowledge. Coordinate 3, techniques of manipulation that take them along the road to this Orwellian state. If I've made any contribution at all in the last 20 years, I think one of the things that has had the biggest impact was to invent the term problem, reaction, solution for something that was known before as the Hegelian dialectic. And it describes a technique of mass manipulation that is devastatingly simple and devastatingly effective. I'm about to describe 9/11. What happens, this is the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, by the way. They have a motto, ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. That is problem, reaction, solution. Creating the problem, then offering the solution to it. After 9/11, George Bush said, "You're free and freedom is beautiful, and you know it'll take time to restore chaos and order out of chaos, but we will." Problem, reaction, solution is that same thing, order out of chaos. Works like this. You want to change the world in a way that you know if you do it openly, you're going to get a massive public resistance, like all these Orwellian changes that are going on today. So you don't do it openly. You play this technique. Stage one, you covertly create a problem. It could be a terrorist event, it could be a war, it could be a run on a currency, whatever suits the solution you want to provide. You then tell, and we come back to what I was talking about earlier, you then tell the public through an unquestioning mainstream media, overwhelmingly, with honourable exceptions, the version of that problem that you want them to believe, i.e. Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy with a bullet that turned corners. That amazingly efficient, effective terror on 9/11 was orchestrated from some guy in a cave in Afghanistan. Hope he had a mobile phone. You want people to believe, you have to create a false villain to hide the fact that you're really behind it. You want the public at stage two to react with fear, with outrage, and words to the effect of, something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? At which point you, who have covertly created the problem, glean that public reaction, or at least the acceptance that something must be done. You then offer openly the solutions to the problems you have yourself created. This is why Tony Blair said after 9/11, the world has changed and never will be the same again. It wasn't meant to be the same again. If you look at the two world wars, at the Second World War here, if you look after the First World War, the power in the world was in far fewer hands than it was before the start. We had the first attempt at a global body, the League of Nations. After the Second World War, power was in dramatically fewer hands than it was before the start, with the World Bank and the IMF and all these global institutions that emerged. And what you had, and I go into this in great detail in my books, you had the same force behind the Nazis and funding them, and you had the same force funding the Soviet Union, funding Britain, funding America. There's a guy, I said in my books years ago that the Bush family, through a guy called Prescott Bush, who is the grandfather of the current president, funded Hitler to a massive extent through a bank called the Union Banking Corporation, which interfaced with the banking and steel empire of a guy called Fritz Thyssen, who was acknowledged as one of the major funders of Hitler. And people just kind of dismissed this and, oh no, can't be. And then a guy came out who is the head of the Holocaust Museum down in Florida, who came out publicly and said, yeah, the Bush family's fortune came from funding the Nazis through Prescott Bush. So you fund both sides, you bring them into a war, and then that changes society forever. And at the end of the war, you say, look, we've had 2 world wars in just a few years here, and the people are tired and in a desperate state, waiting for any solution to this problem. So, what was the solution? An explosion of globally centralized institutions, which today are massively part of the Orwellian state. This is what one of the major Nazis said. Why, of course, the people don't want war. Why should some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back up to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for their lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country and in any generation. Abraham Lincoln said, "Public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. He who molds opinion is greater than he who enacts the laws." Well, if you mold opinion, you can then enact any laws you want. It's all a mind game. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf. All propaganda must be so popular and on such an intellectual level that even the most stupid of those towards whom it is directed will understand it. People can be made to perceive paradise as hell and the other way round, to consider the most wretched sort of life as paradise. So it's all a mind game. That's what problem reaction solution is. And there's another version now, no problem reaction solution. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You don't even need a real problem, just the perception of one to justify the action that was taken. And if you'll note, they've been desperately running around trying to manufacture a problem with Iran so that they can provide the solution. This is Donald Rumsfeld, the Defense Secretary in America when the war on terror was launched and everything, and the war with Iraq. In 1983, he went to Saddam Hussein on behalf of the Reagan-Bush administration to arrange for the shipment of biological and chemical weapons to Iraq, the very same weapons that were used against the Kurds. It came out in government documents in 2002. This was a newspaper report. Donald Rumsfeld, the US Defense Secretary and one of the most strident critics of Saddam Hussein, met the Iraqi president in 1983 to ease the way for US companies to sell biological and chemical weapons, including anthrax and bubonic plague cultures, according to newly declassified US government documents. Donald Rumsfeld was also on the board of a company called ABB, European engineering giant, when they sold nuclear technology to North Korea, and when Rumsfeld became Defense Secretary, he used the fact that there was a nuclear situation in North Korea to target that country and condemn that country. This is how problem reaction solution works. Create the problem and then offer the solution. The other technique that runs alongside this, I call the totalitarian tiptoe. You know from the start that you're going from A to Z. But you know if you go in giant leaps, people are going to look up and say, what's going on? Because the change is so vast and clear. So what you do with a totalitarian tiptoe is you go in little steps, as big as you can get away with, mind, and every single step is projected to the people as unconnected to all the others. That's how we went in Europe from a free trade area, good for jobs, nothing to worry about, into what is now a centralized superstate, and they ain't finished yet. The totalitarian tiptoe. This is how we're going in changes in legislation day after day after day to the Orwellian society. Except that since 9/11 it's more like the totalitarian sprint. I've heard people say over the years that what that David Icke guy is saying about this global conspiracy, centralized power and all that stuff, a load of rubbish. And then I see the same people going, stop globalization, stop globalization. What is globalization? It is the public face of the very agenda that I've been talking about for nearly 20 years. The agenda of centralizing power on a global level in every area of our lives. I know some people, good luck to them. They get to the level of transnational corporations and they say that's the reason for globalization. Transnational corporations, greed, That's what's behind it. But there's another step to take when you realize that through the pyramid within pyramid structure, the transnational corporations in the end are controlled by the same people. They are different masks on the same face again. The transnational corporations are not the engine room for globalization, they are the vehicle for it. And in all areas of our lives, like I say, I've traveled quite a bit. You see even the physical culture of countries. I was in Japan 2 weeks ago. Even the visual, physical structure of countries is now looking the same all over the world. So when we see these protests about the World Bank and the IMF and the mayhem that they're creating and the World Trade Organization, what we need to understand is that it's part of a coordinated agenda for centralization on a much greater level than has been envisaged yet, where you start to connect everything. And the thing is that once you take away an area, call it a country, whatever you like, once you take away its ability to make its own decisions and to be self-sufficient in making those decisions, you have created the end of freedom for that country, that area, whatever you talk about. If you look at Britain now, we can't even cough without the European Union agrees. And because of the World Trade Organization, countries can't even defend their own economies from other parts of the world. And this is not by accident, but by design. Because when you take away people's ability to make decisions within their own sphere, country, whatever, community, you are making them dependent on a global system that they have no control over. Exactly. And who has control over them within the global system? Anyone that controls the global system. And it's a dramatically few people. Like I say, there's one agenda going on behind the scenes and there's the movie. Oh no, it's just free trade. I love free trade. I love that one. Free trade. That's the freedom to exploit some of the poorest people in the world to make your products at a few cents on the dollar and then bring them across the world with as little tariff barrier as possible because it's free trade. Everyone's in favor of that. And then sell it for the highest price you can in another part of the world. It's not free trade, it's freedom to exploit. Free trade is Orwellian newspeak to mislead us to what it really means. I'll give you an example of how this is planned in advance and is not just random. In September 2000, there was an organization called the Project for the New American Century that produced a document of where it wanted America to go as soon as possible. This is before the Bush administration. It was a few months, 2 months before it won the election. The Project for the New American Century was created in the 1990s by people like Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Wolfowitz, the Deputy Defense Secretary at the time of 9/11 and the War on Terror. Also among the creating people of this organization were those that became known as neocons or neoconservatives in the Bush administration when it came in. In that document, in September 2000, it called for American armed forces to be the cavalry on the new American frontier. Bush is not even in power yet. He certainly ain't talking about this in his election campaign. The document said that key allies like the United Kingdom were the most effective and efficient means of exercising American global leadership. It says the United States has for decades sought to play a more permanent role in Gulf regional security. While the unresolved conflict with Iraq provides immediate justification, The need for a substantial American force presence in the Gulf transcends the issue of the regime of Saddam Hussein. It called for a blueprint for maintaining global US preeminence and shaping the international security order in line with America's principles and interests. In other words, the clique that controls America. This grand American strategy, it said, must be advanced as far into the future as possible, and the US must fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous theater wars, major theater wars, as a core mission. All these things unfolded when the Bush administration came in, because the people behind the project for the new American century and this agenda came in with the Bush administration. It talked about peacekeeping missions demanding American political leadership rather than the United Nations. It happened. It highlighted North Korea, Syria, Iran and Libya as dangerous regimes and said that their existence justified the creation of a worldwide command and control system, World Army. This guy, David Frum, was the man who wrote the speech when Bush talked about the axis of evil, which was North Korea, Iraq and Iran, straight off the pages of the project for the new American century. It spotlighted China for regime change eventually, saying it's time for a presence of American forces in Southeast Asia. This could lead to American and Allied power providing the spur to the process of democratization in China. It called for the creation of US space forces to dominate space and total control of cyberspace to prevent their enemies using the internet. Now we're seeing the internet being targeted more and more to stop the free flow of information. It talked of developing biological weapons that can target specific genotypes. And this may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. This is the mentality behind the people behind the war on terror. And then it said this: for this agenda, this process of transformation, as it called it, to happen in a reasonably short time, there had to be some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. This was in September 2000. This process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year to the month after that document was published, and 9 months after the people behind it came to power with Bush, America had what Bush called at the time our Pearl Harbor, 9/11. As a result of that, I go into that in detail in this book, which I wrote some time ago. As a result of that 9/11 horror, the great list of things in that document have been justified into place by that event. This is the guy, the United Nations ambassador at the time, who was pressing the case to invade Afghanistan and all the rest of it. This is the people behind this. John Pilger in the New Statesman said of this guy, John Negroponte, how appropriate that John Negroponte is Bush's ambassador at the United Nations. This week he delivered America's threat to the world that it may require to attack more and more countries. As US ambassador to Honduras in the early 1980s, Negroponte oversaw American funding of the regime's death squads, known as Battalion 316, that wiped out the democratic opposition, while the CIA ran its Contra war of terror against neighboring Nicaragua. Murdering teachers and slitting the throats of midwives were a speciality. These are the people that launched the war on terror. He later became head of US operations in Iraq and head of US intelligence. Because there is the movie, Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and there's the secret agenda doing what we need to justify the agenda. After 9/11, we had Bush saying, we must get Bin Laden. But that's the last thing they wanted. This is a guy called Michael Springman, US consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia at the time of Father George Bush. In Saudi Arabia, I was repeatedly ordered by high-level State Department officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants. These were essentially people who had no ties either to Saudi Arabia or to their own country. I complained bitterly at the time there. I returned to the US, I complained to the State Department here, to the General Accounting Office, to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and to the Inspector General's office. I was met with silence. What I was protesting was, in reality, an effort to bring recruits rounded up by Osama bin Laden to the US for terrorist training by the CIA. They would then be returned to Afghanistan to fight the then Soviets. Greg Palast, a real journalist, in his report on Newsnight at the time, I received a phone call from a high-placed member of a US intelligence agency. He tells me that while there's been constraints on investigating Saudis under George Bush, it's gotten much worse. After the elections, the agencies were told to back off investigating the bin Ladens and Saudi royals, and that angered agents. This was in the period before 9/11, in the months before 9/11. And Robin Cook, the former Foreign Secretary, who unfortunately died of a heart attack when he had lots of things to say on this, he said in a Guardian article just before he died, throughout the 80s, bin Laden was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally the computer file of thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with the help of the CIA to defeat the Russians. They created the problem and then offer the solution, which is a war on terror that, by its very nature, is a war you can never say has ended. A war without end. And here we have Barack Obama. The man behind him, his foreign policy advisor, Brzezinski, is the man who has publicly admitted that he orchestrated the manipulation of the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, which kicked the whole thing off. Whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, Labour or Conservative, the same force is running the show.